The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the tragic story of a little 20-month-old boy from Georgia named Quinton Simon. Now, once you see a picture of this little guy, you will wonder how anyone could bring harm to him. But someone did. Here's his story. 20-month-old Quinton Simon was living with his grandparents, his mother Leilani, and her boyfriend. On October 5th, 2022, at 9:40 a.m., there was a call to 911 to report this little boy missing. The investigation began as a missing persons case. Was this an abducted child? Did little Quinton sneak away into the nearby woods? Soon, the investigation would change. It became a homicide investigation, with Quinton's mom as the prime suspect. Then the true crime community spotlight started to shine on Leilani and her family. Protesters began to gather outside of their home, demanding answers and making accusations. The police investigation continued and led to an expansive search of a landfill. Eventually, remains of Quinton were found. Leilani was arrested, locked up, and charged with his murder. And now a jury and the public will hear the evidence that hopefully answers all those questions about what happened to little Quinton Simon. All the stories we do are difficult. When it's little children like that, it takes it to the next level. Did you see his little brown? I mean, you look at that child. Why would anyone do anything other than hug him? I don't understand that, but we've got to try to figure this all out. Got to figure this all out. And investigations often start, and really do start most of the times, with the 911 call. That's the first time that law enforcement is then intervening in whatever is happening. And that's what happened here. There's a 911 call made, and it's Leilani Simon and her boyfriend Daniel who have the phone and are making the call in the morning. It's about 9:40. Take a listen.
Shout 911, what is your emergency?
Yeah, I need to we believe come from kidnapped. Yeah.
You said someone's been kidnapped?
Yeah, we...
I won't open the front doors open and this place is empty, please. Your 1-year-old son? Yes. When was the last time you seen him?
I saw him this morning when I left at 6.
Okay, have you guys gone outside to check the area?
Yeah.
How old is he?
And he can't open the door.
So you think someone broke in? Has there been any signs of breaking in?
No. No breaking in, the door was open.
Was it unlocked?
Yeah, but the front door had bolts though, but yeah, it was.
No, I can't find him nowhere. I was everywhere, and he's so scared. He's shouting everywhere. Okay, give me a description on him. Give me a description.
He's blue eyes, light skin.
He's got blue green eyes, tan skin, dark hair. He's what now? He's got tan skin, dark brown hair. His eyes are like a brown green hazel. Okay. And he's black, white, and Hispanic. He's Hawaiian. He's what now? Hawaiian. Hawaiian? Yes.
It's, you listen to the call and you're wondering. I mean, because it has happened. We've covered that story. where someone breaks into a home in the middle of the night and takes a young child. It can happen. It has happened. But you look at a case like this and a story and an investigation, and a child goes missing from a house. I mean, there's an obvious first question for all of this, and it's our first question of our investigation tonight, which is, who was at the house that day? Who was there? It's an important question. Who are the people that are in the house where Quinton was staying? Let me bring in my guests who are going to help us through all this. Joining me, forensic death investigator, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University, and host of the very popular Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan, and podcast host and Pop Crime TV reporter, Lauren Conlon with us. Thank you both for being here. Great to see you. I wanted to put up a quick little timeline here because this is a story where a little bit of information has come out, not a ton, but some information has come out. This is significant. 5:29 a.m., Quinton's babysitter receives a text message saying no services would be needed for Quinton that day. That's 5:29 a.m. 6 a.m., baby Quinton is reportedly last seen in his playpen at the home. 9:39, Leilani and her boyfriend Daniel call 911 to report Quinton missing. Then we get to 1 o'clock and the FBI immediately jumping in to help with this search down in Savannah, Georgia. So Lauren, as we look at who's at the house that night, so Leilani's obviously there. It seems her boyfriend Daniel is there. Who else is in this home?
Well, Vinny, I first want to clarify that this home belongs to Leilani's mother, Billie Jo Howell, and her husband, Thomas Howell. And Leilani and Daniel and the three kids have a room downstairs while the upstairs is occupied by Billie Jo and Thomas, and also Leilani's older brother, Paul Simon. And yes, that's his real name, Paul Simon. But Billie Jo and Thomas were not there at the time. As far as we know, it was just Leilani, Thomas, and the three kids.
Joseph Scott Morgan, looking at that timeline, the first thing that jumps out to me, 5:29, canceling the babysitter. Mm-hmm. You don't need to come over. And this is someone from the neighborhood who has spoken about the case, but is, likely going to be an important witness in all this. And then at 6 o'clock, it seems that the boyfriend says, yeah, I saw Quinton at 6 a.m. when I was leaving for work. I'm looking at those two things. I wonder, well, why don't you need the babysitter?
Yeah, one of the things that we look for in investigations, Vin, is particularly when you're talking about, because, initially this is a missing child case, all right? So you begin to think about that, and one of the questions you're going to ask, is there anything that indicates that behaviors have deviated from the norm? So when you would question a parent about something like this, something so horrible, one of the first questions out of the gate is, do you ever cancel the babysitter? And if so, how frequently have you done this? And is this the normal time of day that you would do this? Remember, this is done from texting. So if there's a history of this, you can go back and look at the text if this is their normal piece, if this is the way they do it. And right you are, Vin, when you talk about this point of contact, they're going to be essential in establishing the timeline and also prior behaviors.
Yeah, Lauren, this to me, the canceling of the babysitter at 5:29, to me is a little odd. It's a lot odd. Like if you don't need a babysitter, you should know the night before. Would you wake up at 5 o'clock and say, oh, we don't need a babysitter today? That defies logic, I think, to anyone.
Yes, I agree with you. It's incredibly odd. As a mother, I'm not waking up at 5:30 a.m. and texting my babysitter. And I think that this babysitter really cared about Quinton. There are reports that this babysitter was actually the one that got Leilani to call 911 in the first place, or got Daniel to call. So it's interesting. I mean, this was just the start of Leilani's lies, but I know that you're going to get to that, so I won't give anything away. But yeah, it's the start.
Yeah, we've got a lot to get to. Well, let's listen to Billie Joe, who's Leilani Simon's mother, Quinton's grandma, and as Lauren said, the owner of the home.
Did she have her own rooms within that residence that were?
Yes, sir, she did.
Who did she reside there with?
Danny Youngkin, my husband Thomas Howell, and my son Paul Simon, and the 3 children.
3 minor children?
All right, Joseph, so we're laying out who's in the house. So you're investigating this, and everyone who has access to the house or lives in the house obviously needs to be interviewed, and their story has to be verified, because that's the first place you have to look when a child is missing.
Yeah, you're right. But, you know, one of the initial statements that came out relative to this person is that they stated that the child had been taken or snatched. You know, to think about that, just let that seep into the groundwater there and think about that a little bit. Why is it that your mind flies to that issue immediately? And if that's the case, and if you can come up with that supposition, the question is, who in the hell is coming and going out of that house on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, and why is that house unsecured? Those are the big questions that you're going to be asking, because first off, who knows who the occupants are in that house? If they have an awareness that this little child, this precious little baby is in that house, who would have that information, that would know that that child is there, and that would be so motivated to snatch that child away from that family and run off with them? That's a big question here.
And the other thing, Lauren, that we heard in the 911 call was the door is open. But then the boyfriend says, yeah, but it's got bolts, but it's open. And very clear to say, well, Quinton can't open the door. But the door is open. You live in an area like this and there's woods in a neighborhood. It seems you should be spending some time outside searching for the child, like frantically searching for the child.
I agree with you. And I thought that was a little odd that while Danny is making the phone call, she's just kind of in the background adding context, because that's also not something that you would normally do on a 911 call. Start saying, well, it could be this. Well, it could be that. You're going to want to say, what should I do? Should I go search? You know, what, like everybody, come quick, my son is missing. You don't really get that. You hear more excuses.
Absolutely. All right, Lauren, Joseph Scott Morgan staying with us. Coming up next, what will investigators be able to determine from Quinton's remains?
Additional testing, including a DNA analysis, is being conducted, and we have every reason to believe that this will confirm the remains are Quinton's.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
This afternoon, Chatham County Police Department detectives arrested 22-year-old Leilani Simon and charged her with malice murder, concealing the death of another person, false reporting, and making false statements in connection with the disappearance and death of her son, 20-month-old Quinton Simon. Leilani Simon is being held at the Chatham County Detention Center and is awaiting a bond hearing. We do not anticipate any other arrests in this case. She has been the sole suspect from the beginning. On Friday, our search teams at the Waste Management Landfill found what they believed were human remains. This afternoon, the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, confirmed that they are, in fact, human remains. Additional testing, including a DNA analysis, is being conducted, and we have every reason to believe that this will confirm the remains are Quinton's.
He was thrown out like garbage. This little boy that you're looking at was killed and thrown out like garbage. They had to go to a landfill to recover his remains. Unreal. Which brings me to my next question, which is about what happened to the little guy. What will investigators be able to determine from Quinton's remains? It's so sad. It is so sad. But the investigation must continue. You got to figure this stuff out. Still with us, Joseph Scott Morgan and Lauren Conlon. Lauren, the one thing about this search that I think people have to realize, and this was like a massive search that was done, an incredible effort by everyone involved.
Yes, Vinny, it was a huge search. Tons of money was put into this, over $250,000 by the county. The FBI was involved. You know, they had local police, a canine team, helicopters. Everybody in the area was searching for Quinton Simon.
Joseph Scott Morgan, I want to read something from the state's filing just to give a little perspective on what happened to Quinton, and then you can help us answer the question about what investigators are going to be able to figure out from this part of the evidence. But hours after the defendant had discarded Quinton's body in the dumpster, the hydraulic forks of a front-loading garbage truck lifted up the dumpster and dumped its contents, including Quinton, into the large box that constitutes the back of the truck. Then a powerful compactor built into the truck compacted the contents of the box. Eventually, the truck gorged its load at the trash basin of a local landfill. A bulldozer then shoved the heaped garbage 300 feet from the trash basin to a cell. Once at the cell, the garbage and Quinton were compacted by a roughly 50-ton machine that looks something like a steamroller, but with rollers that are studded rather than smooth. Then there was the search. The process consisted of excavators scooping garbage out of the cell and loading it into dump trucks. The dump trucks unloading the garbage at an open area known as a search deck. The garbage then being spread out into an even layer on the search deck. Law enforcement combing through the garbage, then clearing it to make room for the next load. This is repeated day after day, load after load, ton after ton. Quinton's body, is what they're saying here, went through a lot. But they did it, Joseph Scott Morgan. They found whatever was left of these remains. What are they going to be able to determine from these remains?
Well, I got to tell you, Vin, tip of the cap, first off, to law enforcement and these people that were boots on the ground. You realize how unsuccessful most of these searches generally are? I know you realize that. We've covered it for years. And I've been a part of searches like this, and it is an absolute nightmare to work in this environment. And, you know, they talked about the truck or the piece of equipment that compounds everything that's contained in there. These landfills are split up into, they call it cells. You can call it grids as well, because you can't dump in the same area all the time. You have to keep it evenly spaced. And the upside is you know where that particular dumpster originated from that day. So it would be isolated in that specific topographic area for that site. One of the things you have working against you is nature. Remember, a landfill is there to break down all organic material. And I'm not being disrespectful here, but the human body is chief among these. And so decomposition is promoted. One interesting piece to this, Vin, is that they talk specifically about finding skeletal remains, which means that within weeks, his little precious body would have broken down very quickly, probably a lot quicker than, say, for instance, if this was a body that was placed out in the woods somewhere. You get it into this environment and it's greatly compromised. So if you're looking for, say, injuries to the tissue, like a bruise or even a gunshot wound or a knife wound, you're not going to find it most of the time because all of the soft tissue will be gone. So then you're reliant upon the skeletal remains, which they removed to Quantico. And that's kind of an interesting bit there. For me, it was, at least. They first went to Quantico, and then they came back to the state of Georgia to the state medical examiner's office. They quickly, early on, determined that these were a child's skeletal remains, which are completely different than an adult. They're not matured. And so they're very easily compromised. The bones are very soft. So that's why this is I'm not trying to be grotesque. I'm just saying this is a miracle that they even found him. And so that's why this is such an achievement on the part of law enforcement, and they couldn't deserve more credit.
And as you get those remains and you examine them, what are you looking for? What can you get from the skeletal remains of this small young child?
Yeah, one of the key things is they're being very cagey about this. Did you notice in the report it was very nonspecific relative to, well, the weapon or the instrument that was used? They talked about, and I'm going to get the phrase, maybe you can correct me here, but it was an instrument that was used, and it was nonspecific. Well, an instrument, or an object rather, can be any number of things. It can be a hammer, a baseball bat, it can be a knife. You know, those are all objects or instruments. Generally when you hear object, though, that implies blunt force trauma. So I have to ask myself this: if you're making that determination, and again, we don't have this in its final context, do you have some bit of the skull that remained where you could appreciate maybe some kind of fracture or something that had occurred? Because if you're talking about a knife wound, much more difficult to assess that on skeletal remains.
Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you so much. Really appreciate your insight, and you do it so well and so delicately. Lauren Conlon, thank you as well. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the tragic death of little Quinton Simon. He was 20 months old, which is really the age when our children start to become little people. But for Quinton, his chance to live and grow was taken. Here's his story.
This is 20-month-old Quinton Simon, an absolute angel. With his warm brown eyes and shiny hair, learning something new every day and growing into his little personality. It's hard to believe that anyone could or would bring harm to Quinton. But someone did. He was reported missing on October 5th, 2022. He had been living in Savannah, Georgia with his grandparents, his mom, and her boyfriend. His remains were found in a landfill after an extensive search. Prosecutors say it was the actions of Leilani Simon, his mother, that led them to that search. She's now been charged with his murder, but there are still plenty of questions in this case that prosecutors believe they can answer as they seek justice for little Quinton Simon.
It's a tragedy beyond tragedies. You know, children are so dependent on the adults in their world and the adults in their lives. And they trust their parents. They trust the adults. And when that trust is broken, to me, it's beyond heartbreaking, because what stands between a child and harm are the ones who are there to protect them, to hug them. And obviously that didn't happen in this case. You go to the indictment, and we haven't learned a ton of specifics about this case because of the way it has sort of proceeded through our system of justice, and some information has come out. For instance, take a look here at count 1 from the indictment. Malice murder. This is Georgia. Leilani Marie Simon, on or about the 5th day of October, 2022, did unlawfully, with malice aforethought, caused the death of her son, Quinton Simon, a human being, in a manner unknown to the grand jury at this time. Unknown. Like I said, putting together the pieces of this story and trying to figure out exactly what happened has not been easy for investigators. They need to tell a story, though. When you go to trial, you need to tell a story to the jury. If you're trying to prove someone did something, you got to tell them what you believe they did. Which brings me to my next question. What do prosecutors say happened to Quinton? That's the opening statement. I mean, you've got to tell the jury, hey, this is what happened to this child. This is why we are here. Joining me to help us work through all of this, private investigator Jason Jensen and podcast host and Pop Crime TV reporter Lauren Conlon. I wanted to put one other count from the indictment up because I think this gives us, again, another piece of information from Quinton's story. And this is count 2 from the indictment, felony murder. Did commit the offense of aggravated assault, a felony, in that the accused, Leilani Simon, the mother, did make an assault upon the person of her son, Quinton Simon, with an object that when used offensively against a person did result in serious bodily injury. The nature of the object being unknown to the grand jury at this time. Jason Jensen, things being unknown to the grand jury, to me, problematic. We don't know the manner in which Quinton's life was taken. They say there's an object used. We don't know what the object used here is. There seems to be a few holes right now in this case, unless they just don't want to reveal them, but they didn't reveal it to the grand jury.
You're right, Vinny, and that's the biggest challenge that we have here. I mean, definitely by saying that it's unknown, they don't know how it happened or maybe even why it happened. But what we do know is that from our experience in the legal system, that when a parent combines, illegal controlled substance usage, it often leads to child neglect or abuse. So we have that as a guide for them to follow. And then when they're investigating the disappearance and we get all these conflicting stories that don't align with the facts, then you know that that's the key suspect to be worried over. And certainly the circumstances of losing custody a week before kind of adds into this. So clearly we know who did it. We just don't know how or why.
Lauren, here's a big question I think that is a cloud over this case. They've been saying she was the lone suspect from the start. I get it, but she's not home alone. Her boyfriend is there. Her boyfriend is there. How does he not have the information or not be charged? That's the part that is very confusing to me.
I understand, Vinny. It's confusing. However, I believe that from the start, police knew right away what they were dealing with. Leilani told lie after lie after lie. She was under the influence of a controlled substance. She lied about that. She lied about her whereabouts that night. She lied about her whereabouts the next morning. So right away, they knew what was going on. They just had to prove it. And between analyzing her cell phone records and going through the house and searching, I believe all of that combined. Oh, along with the fact, Vinny, that she was seen with her mother the first day that the landfill was searched. She was seen with her mother taking shots at a bar. She just appeared to be living her life, lying, not exactly caring. So they just had to get their evidence together and make an arrest here. But you're right, confusing, but they knew.
Let me, Jason, count 3 of the indictment for felony murder. The accused did maliciously cause her son, Quinton Simon, cruel and excessive physical pain. It seems to make an allegation like that, you have to have some idea of what happened here.
Right, yeah, they're definitely going through the list of possibilities, going from felony murder, aggravated murder, and really trying to cover all their bases, and they're going to let the facts play out and the jury decide.
Now, we did get something from one state filing in this case, which to me tells us how they ended up at the landfill. The state provided the following information regarding the locations and times of the offensive charged in counts 1 through 4. At the residence located at the house from approximately 11:10 p.m. on October 4th, 2022 to approximately 1:10 a.m. on October 5th, 2022. So she's home from 11:10 to 1:10. Then inside a Dodge Journey bearing a Georgia tag number en route from the house to the dumpsters at the Azalea Mobile Home Plaza between 1:10 a.m. and approximately 1:19 a.m. A 9-minute drive from the home to this mobile home plaza, the dumpsters there. And then at the dumpsters at the Azalea Mobile Home Plaza between approximately 1:19 a.m. to 1:22 a.m. on October 5th, 2022. Jason Jensen, you put together the pieces of a circumstantial case. You look at some of the circumstances here. She's out the night before, 1:10, driving to the dumpsters at a mobile home community.
Right, and her excuse was she claimed that she went to a friend's house to get Orajel, and then when obviously, you know, the investigators are going to vet out that information, and when it doesn't jive, then they know that there's something more sinister that deals with the dumpster. So that's why they, you know, their investigation led to the landfill.
They've got her at the dumpsters. They follow where that dumpster ended up, and they found little Quinton's remains. Lauren, the other thing about this is this now gives me a timeline, right, of when they believe he's dead. The night before, I remember the boyfriend on the phone with 911 saying he saw Quinton at 6 a.m. Those two things don't equal. That doesn't work.
You're right. And I want to point out that Leilani did admit to going to the dumpsters. She said she was just disposing your normal garbage right at 1 a.m. But you're absolutely right, Vinny. Danny said that he saw Quinton. So we're left wondering, did he see him? Is he lying? I mean, I have a feeling that these two, and this is my speculation based on Leilani, they do some drugs. Maybe he doesn't have a good sense of time. We don't know yet.
You know, Jason, he seems to be the most important witness for this case if he's going to testify. He hasn't been charged with anything, right? So he can come into the courtroom and kind of talk about this, but he's got to explain how he can see Quinton at 6 a.m. that morning after the babysitter was called at 5:30 and canceled, but sees him on the way out to work, yet prosecutors are going to say that child was disposed of the night before.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Danny has a immunity situation going on where he's providing state's witness testimony against Leilani because, you know, that's their best evidence to get a conviction. So I wouldn't be surprised if he knew more and could have been charged, but in order to help build a case against the actual actor that caused the death, they needed him to testify.
Yeah, and if he's the other person there, Lauren, my guess is when we get to trial, there's going to be some finger pointing. And Leilani, where's the natural place for her to point the finger? Right at her boyfriend, who said he saw Quinton that morning.
Yes, I'm ready for this trial. I mean, I feel like Danny, I agree with Jason with what he said, but I don't necessarily think Danny was involved in the killing, but it's completely possible that Danny was helping Leilani not get in trouble for her actions.
That makes sense. It doesn't make sense to do it, but your analysis makes sense of what happened here. All right, guests are staying with us. Still to come, and this is another question because there's some history here. Why didn't Leilani have custody?
How can you even live, breathe, sleep, eat? How? So, as a mother, I am Quinton's voice. We are all Quinton's voice.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
as a mother, if my child went missing, I would be out here. I would be wanting everybody in the world to help me, everybody and anybody. And the fact that she's out here just living her best life, partying at Tabby, and your child is, God knows who, laying where in the cold.
What happened to this 20-month-old child is unthinkable. No child should be harmed by anyone, let alone the person in their lives that should be their protector.
These are the types of cases that get people very worked up. People in the community, people in the true crime community got very worked up about this one. They still are, obviously, but now it's been a couple of years. Showing up, protesting at the house, and it's all because a little child, this little child, 20 months, is missing at that point, and mom does not seem that concerned, is not out searching, is like having a pretty good time. And it's very frustrating and it's heartbreaking. And then you dive a little deeper into the family dynamics and what exactly is going on here. Because this was a young mother, obviously, right? A young mother who didn't seem like she was ready for motherhood, but had children. Take a look at this. This is from the Georgia Child Support Worksheet. This is concerning Quinton. Child, Quinton Simon. Non-custodial parent, Leilani Simon. Non-parent custodian, Billy Howell. That's grandma. So in this case where a child goes missing and a child ends up in a landfill, this was a child who was on the radar as being potentially in danger. So much so that Quinton's mom did not have custody of her own child, yet that night she seemed to have custody of her child. Grandma's the actual parent here, is the custodial non-parent. So that brings us to our next question, which is an important one in understanding what exactly is going on in this little boy's life. Why didn't Leilani have custody of her child? You don't lose custody of your child that easily. There have to be issues. Still with me, Jason Jensen and Lauren Conlon. So let's talk about some of those issues and why she wouldn't have custody. Lauren, this is someone, I guess, troubled, a troubled young mother.
Yes, Leilani was actually on probation when Quinton passed away. She had quite a few charges under her belt, with the most recent charge being theft. She was caught burglarizing a store in North Carolina, and then she was caught stealing from somebody else's trailer. And I also want to point out, Vinny, that Billy Joe, her mother, I'm still trying to figure out how she had custody, because her rap sheet is longer than J-Lo's husband list. Billy Joel had grand larceny, battery, prostitution, possession, fraud. I mean, these kids, you have to just feel so bad, because my gosh, what did you all think was going to happen?
And Jason Jensen, so now you look at it and you say, Quinton's on the radar, right? They know that there's problems at home. They try to keep a child as close to home as possible when they can, if there's a relative who can jump in. And I guess the relative here was grandma, but as Lauren pointed out, grandma has her own history in all of this. So this was a child who seemingly didn't really have much of a chance.
Right, yeah. Typically, when this situation arises, it's because the parent, the natural parent, has issues with the law, oftentimes drug-related issues, and the types of offenses that she had recently been convicted of, the theft and the burglary and things, those are usually categorized as drug-related offenses, because that's how they get the funds. They steal things or, trade them for drugs to, satisfy their addiction. So clearly that was the situation. The children, Quinton was removed from Leilani because of the drugs and placed in grandma's care, Billy Joe, but they were living together. So even though she wasn't supposed to have custody, it was still de facto custody because they're in the same home.
And that's where we get to the day or the night that Quinton dies, Lauren, and it seems that even though she's the non-custodial parent, she was the parent with custody at the time that Quinton died. Like, she is there. I don't know where grandma was.
Right. Grandma and her husband were not there. And this is the reason why the other two children were taken from grandma and moved to foster care after this happened, because she did not do her job. She left those babies with a mother who was not supposed to be a mother. She was never supposed to have custody of those kids at that time. And that right there is unfortunately on Billy Joe.
And it brings us like full circle, Jason, to the babysitter, who also will play a large role in all this, because this babysitter basically played a large role in the child's life. I think that was the best care that Quinton got, is when the babysitter got to take care of him.
Yeah, obviously state licensed, responsible adult that is watching more than Quinton as a profession. So certainly qualified and, trusted by other family members of different children to watch their kids. So the time that Quinton was in the best care was while, everybody's relieving their responsibilities to this babysitter.
Yeah, and as we wrap things up here, Lauren, when you look at these pictures of this child, I mean, what do you see?
Vinny, I can't even begin to explain how my heart is just broken. I can't even look at these pictures without wanting to cry. This entire show, you guys have been showing these adorable pictures of this toddler, so innocent, so precious, and the one person that he looked to, his mother, did this to him. I unfortunately think about the fear he must have felt, the confusion, the pain, and my heart breaks.
We're out of time. Thank you both so much. Lauren Conlon, Jason Jensen, we'll see you again. Unfortunately, this is not the first story of a young mother accused in the death of their child. We've seen it before. Sometimes it comes with little or no warning, but here it did. Quinton's grandma had custody. Protective Services knew there were issues, and grandma needed to step in. This should not have happened, and we need to find out how and why it did. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.